Her parents disowned her for marrying a black man. Years later, he became the only reason they survived, and they never even knew it. Claire was the kind of woman who used to color inside the lines. Raised in a small conservative town, she knew all the unwritten rules: how to dress for Sunday service, what to say at potlucks, and most importantly, who was considered acceptable to bring home. But all of that began to unravel the day she met Jallen. He wasn't what her parents expected, or rather, he was everything they feared. A tall, soft-spoken black man with deep brown skin, a sharp mind, and a quiet, steady strength that filled the room without needing to prove itself. He was a structural engineer by profession, but to Claire he built something far more important: a safe space for her to be honest, unfiltered, and finally, seen. They met in the city, far from the front porches and closed shutters of her hometown, and what began as a polite conversation at a community fundraiser became a 6-hour walk through the park, then a routine, then a life. Claire knew what telling her parents meant. She rehearsed the conversation in her head for weeks, trying to soften the edges. But there's only so much you can prepare for. When she told them she was engaged, her mother's first words were, "To who?" And when Claire answered with Jallen's a name, her father stood up without a word and walked out of the room. Her mother didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just looked at Claire like she was a stranger, then said coldly, "We raised you better than this." That was the last time Claire saw them in person. The wedding was small. No flowers sent, no card in the mail, not even a call to say, "We won't be coming." Claire had expected a cold front, but nothing could have prepared her for the total silence that followed. Her parents blocked her number. Family friends stopped replying to her messages. Even her cousin, a bridesmaid once penciled into Claire's childhood daydreams, sent a vague text and never followed up. Claire cried for weeks after the wedding, not because she regretted her choice, never that, but because there was no space for both love and family in the world she came from. Jallen, meanwhile, never spoke a bad word about them, not once. He made tea when her sobs came late at night. He cooked dinner when she didn't have the energy to move. He rubbed her back in silence when she stared blankly at photos from her childhood, wondering if she'd ever hear her mother's voice again. "They don't know me," Jallen said once gently, as they sat on the fire escape watching the sun sink between buildings. "But you do. That's enough for me." Together, they built something from the quiet. They moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a tree-lined neighborhood on the city's edge. Claire started teaching again, middle school English. Jallen took on freelance projects while mentoring younger engineers on weekends. They weren't rich, but they were full. Not flashy, but deeply, unmistakably happy. Still, every now and then, the silence from her parents hummed in the background like an old radio station just barely out of reach. Holidays, Claire mailed cards with return addresses they never acknowledged. On her parents' birthdays, she sent flowers with carefully written notes. Not once did she get a reply. Not a call. Not a word. But she kept sending them. Because a part of her still believed that love, when offered long enough and sincerely, enough might one day be received, and through it all, Jallen stood by her side. Never urging, never judging, just present. In time, Claire stopped crying. The pain didn't disappear. It simply softened, like a scar she learned to carry. And with each passing year, the life they were building felt more and more like home. She never imagined that one day, the people who turned their backs would come to depend on the very man they had rejected. But life, as she would soon discover, has a way of circling back, quietly, without fanfare, placing kindness in the hands of those who once received none. Years rolled by like soft waves, quiet and constant. Claire and Jallen had settled into a rhythm. Two people who once felt like outsiders, now rooted in a life they built with their own hands. There were no grand milestones, no sudden changes, just quiet mornings, steady work, small joys, pancakes on Sundays, late-night documentaries, shared looks that spoke more than words ever could. Still, every December, Claire bought the same brand of holiday cards her parents used to send when she was little, embossed with gold pine cones and scripted with peace and blessings. And every year, she wrote a version of the same message. "We're doing well. I hope you are too. You're in my thoughts." She would slide the card into an envelope, press the flap shut with the weight of everything unsaid, and send it to the address that never changed, though nothing ever came back, not even a return. To sender. Then one unremarkable Tuesday afternoon, a letter arrived in their mailbox, not addressed to Claire directly, but forwarded from her old P.O. box, where she'd kept mail trickling from a former life. She opened it absent-mindedly, expecting a catalog or outdated coupon, and froze. It was from a hospital near her hometown. Inside was a brief, clipped summary. Her father had suffered a stroke. Her mother's health had sharply declined. There were notes about unpaid bills, financial strain, insurance coverage issues. The hospital was trying to locate next of kin. Claire reread the lines as if they might rearrange themselves into something easier. But they didn't. They stayed exactly the same. Clinical, emotionless, cold. That night, she sat at the kitchen table while Jallen cooked. The sizzle of onions in the pan filled the silence, but it wasn't enough to drown her thoughts. "I got something today," she said finally. Jallen turned, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Yeah?" She slid the letter across the table. Read it once, slowly, then again more carefully. His face didn't change much, but she knew him well enough to see the weight settle in his eyes. "I don't know what to do," Claire whispered. "Part of me wants to go down there, and part of me doesn't." Jallen nodded. He pulled out the chair beside her and sat, folding the letter neatly. He didn't speak for a long moment. When he finally did, his voice was soft. "If it were me," he said, "I'd want someone to care, even if I didn't deserve it." Claire blinked, fighting the burn in her throat. "But they don't even know you. They never tried. They didn't try to know me," he corrected gently. "There's a difference." She nodded, silent. He reached for her hand, their fingers lacing naturally. "Whatever you choose," he said, "I'm with you." What Claire didn't know, what Jallen never said, is that he had already made a choice. The night she went to bed early, he stayed up late at his desk, quietly combing through hospital directories. He called anonymously, asked for billing offices, offered to assist with outstanding charges without giving a name. He spoke with clarity, with compassion, and with boundaries. No explanations, no drama. Just solutions. Over the next several weeks, bills began to disappear. Medical equipment was delivered. Co-payments were waived. A physical therapist arrived at her parents' home like clockwork, never knowing the funding came from a man they once refused to acknowledge. Jallen never asked for a receipt, never expected a thank you. He did it quietly, like planting seeds, in a garden he'd never see bloom, because it wasn't about recognition. It was about giving back something that had been denied for too long: dignity. Claire, meanwhile, waited for something. A letter, a call, anything. One afternoon, her phone lit up with a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated before answering. It was her mother. Her voice was shaky, unsure. I think someone's been helping us." A long pause. "Was Hugh?" Claire's heart thudded. "Helping with what?" "Your father's care, the bills, someone's doing something." Claire looked at Jallen, who was quietly folding laundry across the room. "No," she said truthfully. "Not me," and it wasn't. Not directly. But she looked at him, and something inside her softened into awe. Whatever happened next, however her parents chose to respond, Claire knew one thing for certain. She married a man whose grace didn't need to be seen to be real, and one day she hoped they'd see it too. The days blurred into weeks and then into quiet months. Claire continued with life as usual, grading essays, brewing tea, folding laundry next to Jallen in silence that felt warm, not empty, but miles away. Something unexpected was happening. Her parents, still silent, still distant, began to experience something that felt like relief. Slowly, one by one, their burdens began to vanish. The first bill disappeared without explanation. A hospital invoice, once stamped with red overdue notices, now returned with a balance marked, "Paid in full." Then came the specialists, 2 of them, assigned to her father's stroke rehabilitation. Neither charged a single cent. The clinic assumed insurance had covered it. Next, their pharmacy deliveries arrived like clockwork. Medications that once drained their savings began showing up in tidy white bags, marked prepaid. Claire's mother, skeptical by nature, called the hospital's billing department. She was bounced between departments until someone mumbled something about third-party private support and anonymous benefactor records, but no names were given. Her father never asked. He took his pills quietly, eyes turned toward the window, saying less than ever. One Thursday morning, Claire returned from the grocery store and checked her phone while unpacking apples onto the kitchen counter. A voicemail notification blinked across the screen. It was from her mother. She stared at the screen for a long moment before pressing play. The message was short, awkward, and strangely soft. "Claire, thank you for whatever you did. That's all." Click, that was it. Claire stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, one hand still resting on a paper bag. The hum of the refrigerator felt louder than it should. Whatever you did. But Claire hadn't done anything. Not a call, not a payment, not even a reply to that letter. She had wanted to, but she hadn't moved. She walked into the living room, where Jallen sat reading, legs crossed casually, his glasses sliding down his nose. "I got a message," she said slowly. He looked up. "From my mom." He raised his eyebrows slightly. She said, "Thank you for something. I don't know what she thinks I did." There was a pause, long enough for silence to slip between them. Jallen gently took off his glasses, folded them, and set them on the armrest beside him. His face held that same unreadable calm Claire had come to know, steady as stone but never cold. "Maybe," he said. "Someone wanted to help." Claire studied him. "Jallen, was it you?" He didn't answer. Not with words, just the faintest smile. Gentle, small, but unmistakable. She stared at him, heart caught between awe and disbelief. "Why?" she whispered. His answer was simple. "Because you still cared, even when they didn't." Claire didn't cry. Not at first. Not even later that night when she lay beside him in the dark, her fingers tracing invisible lines across his chest. But something in her shifted. She thought of the man her parents refused to even look in the eye. The man they saw as an outsider. The man they believed would take their daughter away. They were wrong. He didn't take her. He held her up. He healed what they had broken. And now, without asking for credit, without expecting acknowledgement, he had returned something to them they never truly deserved. Mercy. Over the next week, Claire watched Jallen more closely. Not because she doubted him, but because she finally saw the full weight of who he was. This man who gave and gave, even to people who would never say his name without flinching. She never told her mother the truth. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Let them believe it was fate or kindness from a stranger. Let the mystery sit in their quiet home like a question that never quite gets answered. What mattered was the truth she lived with every day. That love, real love, isn't loud. It doesn't wait to be recognized. It simply shows up, does the hard thing, and disappears back into the silence. It was a Tuesday, ordinary in every way, until the phone rang. Claire was in the teacher's lounge sipping lukewarm coffee when her cell buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She hesitated before answering, her voice polite but guarded. "Hello? Hi, is this Claire Whitman?" "Yes. This is Cynthia Porter from Bay Ridge Medical. I'm calling regarding some billing adjustments related to the Whitman family file." Claire sat upright, heart hitching slightly. "My parents?" "Yes, ma'am. We're just finalizing some paperwork and wanted to confirm details about the third-party account that's been covering the expenses. Claire blinked. I'm sorry. What account? There was a pause on the line. The woman's tone softened. Oh, my apologies. We were under the impression this was coordinated with your consent. The bills have all been paid through the Whitman Support Fund. That's the name listed on the foundation record. Claire's mouth went dry. Wait, there's a foundation? Yes, fully verified, backed by private funds, registered under a Jallen Whitman. Claire's grip tightened around the phone. She heard herself say thank you, heard the call end, heard the silence that followed. But none of it felt real. The words blurred. The air grew heavy. She stood abruptly, nearly knocking her coffee over. That night, the apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of jazz playing from the speaker. Jallen stood in the kitchen, cutting vegetables with deliberate calm, the blade tapping rhythmically against the board. Claire walked in slowly, holding her coat in one hand, the other clenched. Around her phone. Jallen, she said. He looked up, his eyes met hers. And in that single glance, she knew. He already understood why she was there. You started a foundation in our name, she said, voice trembling. You've been paying for their care. Every bill, every doctor, every visit. Jallen set the knife down. He didn't deny it. He didn't reach for a speech. He just nodded once, gently. I didn't do it for them, he said, voice quiet but steady. I did it for you. Claire's breath caught in her chest. You loved them, even when they walked away. I saw that. Every holiday card, every quiet night you stared out the window wishing they'd call. I couldn't fix the past, but I could make sure that love didn't go unanswered. Claire shook her head, eyes brimming. But they hurt you, they didn't even try to know you. How could you still help them? Jallen stepped closer. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Because I know what kind of daughter you've been, he said. And I love the way you love Claire, fierce, loyal, even when it hurts. Her knees gave out before she realized it, and she sank into the nearest chair, tears spilling freely. She wept, not just for what he had done, but for everything he had quietly carried. No fanfare, no resentment, just grace in its purest form. Jallen knelt beside her, resting a hand on her back. They may never say thank you, he whispered, but you don't need their words to know what's right. Claire buried her face in her hands. She wasn't crying because she was sad. She was crying because she finally saw him in full, not just the man who held her when she broke, but the man who gave compassion where none had been earned, who chose love not because it was returned, but because it was who he was. And somewhere deep inside her, something settled, a truth she had always believed but never seen so clearly. Real love doesn't wait for permission, just acts, quietly, powerfully, without condition. Later that night, Claire sat on their balcony wrapped in a blanket, watching city lights flicker like distant stars. Jallen brought her tea and sat beside her, their hands finding each other. The dark. She turned to him and said only 2 words. Thank you. He squeezed her hand gently. Anytime, he said, and he meant it. It took Claire 2 weeks to decide, not because she wasn't ready, but because she wanted to be sure her reasons weren't rooted in anger or grief or some need for closure that might never come. In the end, she went not to seek reconciliation, but to deliver something far more simple and far more powerful, the truth. The drive back to her hometown felt both familiar and foreign. The same roads, the same fields, the same porch swing still creaking in the breeze like time had stopped. But everything inside her had changed. She parked in front of the house she hadn't seen in years. A house that once held birthday cakes, bedtime stories, and Sunday roasts, before silence filled every room between them. Her mother opened the door. Gray streaked her hair now. She looked smaller than Claire remembered. They stood there for a second too long, unsure of who should speak first. Then Claire said softly, I'm not here to fight, I just want to say something. Her mother stepped aside. Inside, the house was dim, but clean. The air smelled faintly of mint tea and dust. Her father sat in an armchair, a blanket over his knees, his posture thinner but somehow heavier. Claire stayed standing. "I'm not here because you changed," she began. "I'm here because I did." Her voice didn't shake. It didn't. Eyes. It just was. "You pushed me away for loving him," she said. "But he's the reason you're still standing. He's the one who made sure you had care, who paid your bills, who never asked for anything in return." Her mother's lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out. Claire's gaze shifted to her father. He didn't meet her eyes at first, but slowly, he looked up. There was no speech, no long confession, just a long, strained pause. And then, a whisper. "We were wrong." That was it. No hugs, no tears, no movie-ending catharsis. But for Claire, that quiet admission was louder than any apology. She left without staying for coffee, and when she walked back to the car, she didn't look back. Jallen didn't ask what they said when she returned. He simply met her at the door, pulled her into a long, steady embrace and let her breathe. They didn't need to talk about it, because sometimes the greatest peace comes not from what others give, but from knowing you did the right thing anyway. Months passed. Life returned to its gentle rhythm, and while Claire never resumed regular contact with her parents, something in her had settled. Not healed completely, but softened, like scar tissue that no longer ached when touched. One evening, she sat curled up with Jallen on the couch, scrolling through headlines on her tablet when an idea sparked. "What if there were a place," she said, "for people like us? For couples who've had to choose love over approval?" Jallen looked at her. "What kind of place? A space to talk, to process, to remind each other they're not alone." Jallen didn't hesitate. "Let's build it." That's how the Unbroken Circle was born. A support group for families divided by racial bias in marriage, where love was centered, pain was acknowledged, and no one had to pretend they weren't hurting. Claire led the sessions. Jallen never took the spotlight, but every chair, every flyer, every childcare voucher was paid for from an anonymous donation he set up under a trust. He never wanted credit. He only ever wanted impact. And slowly, word began to spread, not about who they were, but what they did. People whispered not about race or resentment, but about compassion, about a man who never raised his voice and a woman who never stopped believing love was worth fighting for. They became a quiet example, not of perfection but of perseverance.